Over a year ago, I'd made my first ever plushie using a 3D model, my mini Gub. Since that day, I have improved both at sewing and pattern drafting. So today I want to remake my Gubby plush by making it bigger and better. Let's get started. When I first made Mini Gub, it was using a modified version of the Roblox model alongside a program called Plushify. It's a website that you could use to turn 3D models into plush patterns. For a while, you could use Plushify for free personally and commercially, but due to changes made in its terms of service in November of 2025, if you want to either sell your plushies and patterns, pay someone to make a plush using your Plushify pattern, or share your patterns for free, you'll need a commercial Plushify license. And unfortunately, I do not have an extra $500 a year to spare. This isn't a dig on Plushify's new terms. The people behind Plushify made an amazing tool and deserve some compensation considering people do use this service for commercial purposes. Just as a creator who likes to share her patterns for free, I knew if I wanted to keep doing this in the future, I would need to find a different method for drafting sewing patterns. And after some searching, I found this Blender add-on called Seams to Sewing Patterns. It's pretty self-explanatory. When making a 3D model that you want to apply a texture to, you need to unwrap the model into flat 2D shapes. To do so, you add seams along the edges of your model, and when unwrapping, you get something like this. The add-on converts this UV map into our pattern pieces. To traditional plushie artists or fursuit makers, this is kind of like casting a sculpt in tape and then cutting out the pattern pieces. Instead of doing that traditionally, it's completely digital. And instead of sewing a physical prototype, you could simulate how the model will look sewn based on your place seams. If the simulation looks off, you can either modify your seam placement or your model until the final product is to your liking. How fun is that? I'm simplifying the process a lot here for the sake of time. I'll make a more in-depth video in the future about my drafting process. Right. This was a Gubby video. I make a quick sketch of what I want the plush to look like and then start modeling. Who's ready to retro max? I use cubes with subdivision surface modifiers to block out the shapes. Oh my goodness, guys. How are we gonna get the same leg on the other side? The humble mirror modifier to the rescue. So the reason I made my initial Gubby pattern, because this was when Gubby was first going viral or something. It was Gubby's first day on Earth. You know how bootleg companies just love to like strike while the iron's hot and like make their bootleg plushies? I had a really big gripe with the bootleg plushies. They just made Gubby so like skinny and malnourished, and that's just like, that's not Gubby, that's an imposter. That's the block out done. I'm gonna Boolean merge everything. It's like, oh my god, this topology, it's awful, it's evil, why would you do that? It's necessary, it's a necessary evil. But since my shapes are relatively low poly, it's easy to go back in and clean up my edges. Okay, I think I've cleaned up the seams enough, and we could start on doing the pattern simulations. Knowing where to place seams takes a bit of practice. I like to think about how the seam will look on the plush visually, and then if the pattern piece would be tricky to sew or cut out. Referencing real plushies can help with seam placement if you find one with a similar shape. For areas with lots of curves, adding darts helps preserve the roundness of your pattern pieces. After I am happy with my seam placement, I do my first sewing simulation. Okay, everybody. Who's ready for the first simulation of the plush pattern? These are the shapes that are created from these red seams here. Now, the first simulation is often pretty ugly, so we're gonna see how that looks. Ooh, wow. Yeah. Oh, wow. It looks so good, guys. This is a really cute Gubby. The first simulation is likely going to look wonky, and that's okay. You can tweak the seams of your model or the geometry of the model itself, compare with your previous simulations, and keep making revisions until you are happy. Give or take, this pattern went through 20-ish different models, and that's why we do pattern drafting digitally, because you can just keep making them and you don't have to like sew. This is the first time I did a pattern drafting live stream, so the full process of the draft phase can be viewed here. I hope to do more live streams in the future as I had a lot of fun. After getting a simulation I am happy with, I scale down my base model until it's the size I want to sew the plush. Apply that scale, and convert that sewing pattern again. I do this so the plush is the exact size I want to print out later on. I then export the sewing pattern as an SVG. Before we start sewing, we need to organize the SVG that was exported by Blender. For this phase, I use Affinity since it's like Adobe Illustrator, but free. I love free software. Free software is so yummy. I love free software. When opening my exported sewing pattern, I am greeted with this. Lots of unlabeled shapes with auto-generated alignment markers. And it's up to me to piece together this mess and make it coherent. I like to delete any duplicate pattern pieces, and then one by one bring these pieces into a new document. These artboards, as they're called in Affinity, are the size of my printing paper. So while I clean up the pattern pieces, I'm also getting it print ready. I label the pattern pieces, add sewing instructions, clean up jagged edges, mark the fur direction, clean up the auto-generated alignment markers, and add seam allowance. The entire time I'm doing this, I have Blender open on my second monitor, and I use it as a guide when adding these labels. For pieces that are larger than a sheet of printer paper, I split them into 2 pieces, and when I go to cut out my pattern pieces, I will tape these sides together before cutting. This cleanup stage takes ages, but making the pattern easy to understand helps with the sewing process later on. I know I glossed over a lot of stuff, but I don't want to overwhelm the average person with my yapping. And after a few hours, I have 8 pages of Gubby pieces that I could print out and start my sewing. Before I start sewing, I need to do some embroidery first. I want Gubby's face to be embroidered on, so that has to be done before sewing the head. I take my pattern piece and cut it out. Then, trace Gubby's face under a sheet of tearaway embroidery stabilizer. When working with a furry fabric like Minky, using a stabilizer like this keeps the fur fibers out of the way as you embroider. I take a piece of Minky fabric the size of my pattern piece and place it in a hoop with my stabilizer on top. I got these square hoops to try out as I was told they have tighter tension and work best for thicker fabrics, but I still had a hard time using these. It's likely user error, and I'll give them another shot with my next project. Now, instead of embroidering all of this by hand, which would take hours, I'm using a free motion foot on my sewing machine. Using a zigzag stitch and maneuvering the hoop under the needle, I can use my sewing machine to do most of the embroidery for me. This is called free motion embroidery, and it requires a lot of practice. I'm still not the best at it, but with each project, I get better. I still go back in and manually fix some areas, but the machine method saves tons of time in the long run. To put it into perspective, I spent 3/4 of the time working on this plush hand embroidering. It's tedious, so I like to cut corners when possible. Afterwards, I take the fabric out of the hoop, remove the stabilizer, and trace the pattern piece on the back. Now I can start sewing the head. First things first, I sew all of the darts on the face. If a pattern piece has a dart, I'm always sewing that first. Then, something I also do after each pass of sewing is clipping down my seams. Doing this step improves the shape of the plush because it releases tension, especially on curved sections. I use pinking shears for this, but you can trim down the seam allowance using regular shears. Assume I do this for all of my seams, even if I don't show it. After all of the darts on the face are sewn, I sew the neck piece to the face. These markers align with each of the facial darts, so I can ensure my pattern pieces are properly aligned when sewing. That's the front of the head done, so time to work on the back of the head. I prepare my pattern pieces, sew their darts, and sew the 2 back pieces together. Now I could pin the back piece to my front piece. And sew all around until the head is complete. What a beautiful face. The ears are easy to sew together. I just align each side with its respective icon and sew a straight line. Repeat that for each side. And then turn it right side out when the last seam remains. Stuff the plush piece, and close the ear with a ladder stitch. We can put these pieces aside and start working on the body of the plush. Now the body has a lot more pieces. Not only that, but this gusset along the belly. And if you can't tell by all the labels, this piece connects to a ton of other pattern pieces. Overwhelmed? So was I when I was trying to put this plush together. Luckily, I've already done all the work for you, so let me walk you through what I did. Before sewing anything to the belly, I need to prepare my side body pieces. First off, sew the dart along the bottom. After doing that twice, I quickly sew the tail. I sew the darts, then sew my 2 tail pieces together, keeping the bottom open where the tail attaches to the body. Let's start building Gubby's back leg. Sew the darts on the front and back knee pieces, then sew the 2 of those pieces together. That creates this shape, and we can then attach this knee piece to our body piece. Honestly, I spend more time pinning fabric than sewing pieces together. Why do they call it sewing? It should be called pinning. That's my favorite hobby. Pinning fabric. Oh, it's so fun. I am having a blast. But for real, taking the time to properly pin your fabric makes sewing a breeze. Once that's done, I attach this back leg piece to my knee pieces, using my alignment markers once again to help with pinning my fabric. Since the back leg piece also attaches to the gusset, there's going to be some overhang once it's attached to the body, and that's completely fine. At this point, this is what the body piece should look like. Put your newly constructed piece aside and sew your front inner leg piece to the gusset. Once that's done, you can start sewing the body piece to the belly. I start from the back of the plush, sewing the rest of the back leg and back knee to the gusset. Now from the middle, pin and sew the body and gusset together, while also sewing this back leg to itself and the front leg pieces together, finishing it off with sewing the other side of the front legs and attaching the front of the gusset to the front of the body. I know it's hard to discern what pieces are being sewn with the fabric being all the same color and also bunched up as I'm sewing along the seams. It's a little difficult to follow, so I hope these diagrams help visualize what I'm sewing. After doing all of that, you have to do it all again for the other side. Yay, yay, this is so fun. I love sewing. That was a lot of assembly. But at this point, you should have a Gubby fur rug. Funnily enough, I found sewing the foot bottoms to be harder than sewing the body, and I had to resort to ancient texts. Okay, not really ancient texts. But if you want detailed plush making tutorials, I highly recommend Makeshift Wings. Their videos help a lot and go into great detail about aspects of plushie making. After all of the foot bottoms are sewn, I do a test stuff to check the shape and because I'm impatient. So now, after taking the stuffing out and flipping my project inside out again, I sew the seam along the back. Make sure to not sew over the tail opening when doing so. Now I can take my headpiece and place it inside the body upside down. Pin the head to the body and sew all the way around the neck. Now it's time to flip Gubby right side out again and fill it with stuffing through the tail opening. This is the largest sewn plush I have made, and let me tell you, stuffing this plush took a while. It would be easier if I had a bigger opening to stuff from, but I'm stubborn, and I made it work.
Is that a Gubby?
Now to close off the hole, I pin my tail piece over the opening, and ladder stitch the tail to the body. The last thing I need to do is ladder stitch the ears on top of the head. And after doing this for both ears, I could finally say this project is finished. And let me tell you, this is my best plush yet.
Is that a Gubby?
I am so happy with the overall shape of the plush. And putting it side by side with my first Gubby plush, you could see the improvement. Not only in my sewing, but pattern drafting as well. It's amazing to see how much I improved at plush making in 1 year. I may not be able to take this gubby out with me like I do with my mini gub, but regardless, I love both of them equally. And like all of my other sewing patterns, you can find the printable PDFs of Gubby and a few others for free over on my Ko-fi. It comes with the pattern I used for this video, alongside a scaled down version if you wanted to make your own mini gub. And if you enjoyed this video, you should like and subscribe. Your support allows me to keep making these projects and these free patterns. I also want to thank all of you for 50,000 subscribers. I'm glad people like what I do and put up with my spontaneous crafts, so I hope to see you when I make my next project. Bye bye!